They're not lavish, but at least if you miss dinner, there's an opportunity to grab something. We have one taker. Are we live? We are live. So this is an experiment. We have all of you here in person at Jefferson Elementary, and we also are on Zoom. So people who could not come in person are Zooming in. How many folks do we have on Zoom? 13 folks on Zoom. So thank you all for coming in person. Thank you all who are online for joining us. My name is Rick Cole, and it's my honor, truly, to serve you as District 2 City Council member. Just past my 100 days. I don't have a whole lot to show for it, actually, not being an executive, being one of 8, but I think I'm making a contribution at City Hall. And one of the areas where I have focused my attention is on our city budget. You've all heard the statement by Lord Acton, even if you don't know who said it, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Without making any partisan comments, I think we can see what's happening in Washington, see the truth of all that. But I think the corollary is also true. Powerlessness corrupts, and absolute powerlessness corrupts absolutely. You can't have a democracy if the power is not resting in the people. We can't just vote every 2 years or 4 years and expect to maintain our democracy, especially in times like this, where we live really kind of in an attention deficit democracy, in which sound bites and disinformation seem to dominate the political discourse. And everything is shortened to what you can fit on a bumper sticker. You all have chosen tonight to exercise your power because knowledge is power. And knowledge about how the city government works, particularly about the budget, is absolutely crucial to local democracy. Now, I knocked on over 5,000 doors in my campaign, and I talked to many of you. And I found almost universally that despite all of the angst we have about polarized politics, that the vast majority of people I talked to were deeply thoughtful, very caring, and knew almost nothing about their local government. And that disjointment, I just made that word up, that gap between thoughtful people who care about their community. And we know what the president had for breakfast this morning, right? Because it's on the news. Whether you watch MSNBC or Fox News, we hear about national news all day, every day. And yet our local government is actually more impactful on our daily lives. How many of you ever heard of Willie Sutton? Okay, so who was Willie Sutton? He was a bank robber. He was the most famous bank robber during the Depression, and he was arrested multiple times. And the last time he was arrested, a reporter asked him, "Willie, why do you keep robbing banks?" And some of you know what he responded. That's where the money is. Well, if you go to City Hall and you ask the question where the money is, it's in the budget. It's in the operating budget, which is what pays for the daily operations of our police department, our fire department, our Parks and Rec department, our library department, our housing department. That's the operating budget. That's the salaries and the pencils and the gas for the fire trucks and the bullets for the guns and the tires for the public works trucks. That's the operating budget. The capital budget is the stuff we build. This was part of the school district capital budget at one time, right? To build this school. The park is part of our capital budget, our streets, our street lights. In fact, if you begin to think about it, a lot of everything that we take for granted is the city. You cannot go out your door without stepping on a city sidewalk. And in fact, inside your home, if you flip on the lights, that's the city's water and power department. If you turn on the water or flush the toilet, that's the city's public Pasadena Water and Power. So our local government is ubiquitous, and how we pay for it is what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, you're not going to mostly hear from me. You're going to mostly hear from our city manager. Anyone know what our city manager's name is? I bet you do.
Miguel Marquez.
Miguel Marquez, an unusual city manager, started out as an attorney for the city and county of San Francisco, was an appellate court justice appointed by Governor Brown, and then was last the chief operating officer, COO, of the county of Santa Clara. He's actually never worked directly in a strictly city government until now. As you will find, a very thoughtful leader for our city. And the city manager, we are, in theory, part-time. I have a day job, my colleagues have day jobs. The city manager is the person who day to day is in charge of the city, the chief executive of the city. And he gave a presentation on the budget to the finance committee, and I asked him to come out tonight. The reason he is not here is he's doing double duty. He is finishing up a meeting with my colleague, council member Justin Jones, and he's going to rush over here and give us a presentation on the budget. But let me say, the operating budget is about to be unveiled next month. But we got our first look at the capital budget yesterday. The capital budget is $446 million. It's almost $500 million. Anyone know what the operating budget for Pasadena is these days? Yes, billion with a B, $1.1 billion. Sometimes when I talk to folks at the door and I tell them that the budget of Pasadena is, in fact, I was knocking on doors yesterday. No, I'm sorry, Sunday. And I told someone what the budget was, and he said, that's a lot of money. And it is, it's a lot of money. So is the capital budget, 446 million. Now, I bet you know what 195 million of that is. Yes, we're going to be rehabilitating the library courtesy of you voting for the library bond. That's $195 million. So that's right off the top, 195 million. A big chunk of the rest of that is for our water and power. We invest in light poles, we invest in water pipes and sewer pipes, etc. So a big chunk of that is for infrastructure we sort of take for granted, some of it even underground. But I am really concerned about our spending priorities on the capital budget. I started that concern as a planning commissioner. That's one of the main reasons I decided to run. We're an older city. We have a $2 billion shortfall of projects on the list to be done that we have no funding for. $2 billion. Now, not all that has to happen tomorrow, but one of the problems is the longer you put off many things, the more expensive they get. That's particularly true of our streets. Offhand, I'm sure Miguel knows this number. Offhand, I'm not sure how many lane miles Pasadena has, but we have a lot of streets. And just to keep them the way they are now, which is not ideal, would cost us $11 million a year. And what does that go for? That goes for periodically slurry sealing, where you just basically put a layer of hot asphalt oil on that, seals the cracks. And for the next 5 years, you probably won't have very many potholes. But if you don't do that, the potholes start growing. And in fact, if you don't keep on top of it, within 5 years, it'll cost you 4 times as much to fix the street as it would have been to slurry seal it in advance. And if you let it go 10 years, it costs 10 times as much because you got to come back and rip up the street and repave it. So it makes sense for us, no matter whether you love roads, hate roads, think roads are important or not, if we don't keep up our roads, it's going to cost us money down the road. That was unintentional. So it costs $11 million a year just to stay where we are, which isn't great, right? Many of our streets are fine, but a lot of our streets are falling apart. For a number of years, we were only putting in 5 million. That's how our streets got to the way they are. The last 2 years, because of our city manager, we had some money from the federal government because of COVID. He put some of that money into paving. We've been able to double our pavement budget from 5 to $10 million, almost keeping up. This year, the budget is back down to 5 million. I think that's worrisome. I think it's going to cost us money down the road. It's going to cost you money when you hit a pothole and you lose your tire, which happened to me not long ago. Not in Pasadena, though. Also, our fire stations. You care about fire protection? I think we all have had a wake-up call. According to our capital budget, we need to rehab or replace 5 of our fire stations. They're 50 and 60 years old. They're not built for today's trucks. They're not built for today's earthquake standards. They're not built for men and women firefighters. They're not built for a lot of the equipment that we have. And so we need to replace them. $130 million, not a penny in the budget for that. We're in the era of climate change, of heat. We should be planting more trees. Now, we had a victory on that. I think because I was there. That's one thing I can claim in my 100 days. We got a request. The city had left out $70,000 in this year's tree budget by accident. So that would have gotten us back up to 400 trees. But last year, 500 trees of the city's trees were cut down. So I said, well, why don't we double that 70,000? Then we can plant 600 trees. We can actually end up to the good. Got that through finance committee, got the city council to unanimously approve it. And the city manager has committed to doing that ongoing. We'll be planting at least 600 trees from now on every year. So that's a big plus. But the one thing, I talk to people about homelessness. I talk to people about affordable housing. I talk to people about public safety. You know what the one issue at the door that I heard most often when I asked people, what do you care about? It was traffic safety. It was the speed of cars on their streets. It was the amount of reckless driving on our arterials. It was speed on Orange Grove and Washington and Hill Avenue. And this year, out of a $446 million budget, how much do you guess we put aside for transportation? 446 million. So 10% would be 40 million, 46 million. 1% would be 4.6 million. How much do you think is in the budget for transportation? $130,000.
Well, don't spend it.
And 100,000 of that is for something that Pasadena is really famous for, planning, right? We're not so great about implementing our plans, but we are great on making plans. We hire consultants. Yes. We do. And we hire outreach people who come from out of town, learn how to outreach to you. We pay them and then they leave. And then we don't really build that muscle for us to be able to consistently be able to reach out and inform people. So obviously that is a concern of mine. And so I spoke at some length yesterday. I try not to do that, but I spoke at some length to outline what about our fire stations? What about climate resilience? What about transportation and our roads and our streets? And again, on plans for which we spend literally millions of dollars on consultants, literally. There's not a single line in the capital budget for all the promises that have been made in all these specific plans, right? We have hours and hours of hearings. We ask people to come out and comment. We write these beautiful plans, right? North Lake will be an urban oasis where people will walk. It sounds like Paris, right? And there's plans for wider sidewalks and beautiful shady street trees and all kinds of public amenities. Your eyes water. It sounds so beautiful. But there's not a dime in our capital budget to actually do any of that. And so why are we making these elaborate plans? When I was on the planning commission, I made a motion that in addition to adopting the East Pasadena or East Colorado specific plan, the council allocate at least $50,000 to actually implementing something in the plan. The council approved the plan unanimously without my amendment. So that's the capital budget. We expect Miguel, I am actually stalling for time until Miguel gets truth to tell. Here's the message I would like to give you tonight before Miguel comes and shares his thoughts about our city's budget. And he has a hard job. Please be nice to him. And that is this. We had our first public hearing on the capital budget. We have 140,000 people in our city. We got 4 letters. And I don't think we had any speakers. And we're talking about 446 million of your tax money. Thomas Jefferson said, if you want a people that are both ignorant and free, you want something that never has been and never will be. Unless we are knowledgeable about how our money is spent, we are without the power. That's not a real democracy unless we are making decisions, not just the 8 of us who you elect, but all of you. And to have 4 people paying attention. By the way, we spent about 7 hours of hearings on a fuss between the Maxwell house and their 4 neighbors, right? If any of you watched the television, it went on and on and on. By the way, that was an appeal from the Planning Commission where we spent, I don't know, it was Board of Zoning Appeals. Juliana and I were on there. I don't know, we spent 5 hours on it then. So people get all worked up about these things. And for those neighbors, it was important. For the Maxwell house, it was important. But for all of you and for 140,000 people in this city, $1 billion of your tax money and $446 million of your tax money for capital, that's a lot of money. Willie Sutton was right. That's where the money is. And so if you care not just about the city as it is, but how it's going to be for Jasmine in your generation, we're building for you, and previous generations built for us. The Colorado Street Bridge, the Civic Auditorium, Longfellow School, Jefferson Park, Washington Park, the Rose Bowl. These are physical legacies of previous generations who invested in our prosperity, our quality of life. They are what made Pasadena the city that it is today. It's not a perfect city, but it's a city we all choose to live in because we love it here. And it's our responsibility to be investing in the future wisely. And it's not just building things now, it's also preparing for a changing world. So that's, I'm gonna text Miguel and tell him that, say again? He said he'll be here at 7:30. Yeah, no, I said that at the beginning. He is on his way. All right. because I'm tired of hearing from me and you, Willie, too. So I'm going to turn to you because there's some hands raised. Yes.
Oh, wait.
Come on over here because we've got folks on the Zoom call and we want them to hear too. Go ahead, Bo.
Thank you. Rick, thanks for hosting this.
Mhm.
Means a lot to us that you share the information that you were privy to, but most of us aren't. So it's really meaningful that you've allowed us to have that kind of information. One thing that I'm curious about that I've been hearing in the news is this rate increase for water and power.
Mhm.
While you're doing a great job installing, I think would be a good topic to talk about. If you could enlighten us on the rate increase.
Sure. Thank you, Bo. So we don't know much at this point. We, of course, have hired consultants, right? Before I got on the council. And they are studying from two aspects. One, the cost of electricity, because we just raised water rates, right? I say we, because now I'm a council member. I wasn't voting then. But water rates went up last year. Sewer rates went up last year. And trash rates went up last year. So now it's electricity. And so there's a lot, I certainly heard a lot about the rate shock. The two aspects that we'll be looking at are the cost of providing electricity. And the other is how it needs to be allocated among all of us, right? Because Caltech pays a utility bill. The city of Pasadena pays a utility bill. Lavender and Honey Coffee Shop pays a utility bill. The landlord in an apartment building pays a utility bill. Single family homeowners pay a utility bill. So there's the overall cost of providing electricity. And then there's how we allocate it among the various people. In the old, or the various customers, I should say. In the old days, oh, there's our city manager. He beat the clock, Francis. Welcome, Miguel. We are not me.
Yeah.
But so among the customers in the old days, the more you use, the cheaper it was, right? Caltech had really low rates. The law has changed. And so now it's the law under Proposition, I believe it's 218. We have to charge you what it costs to serve you, right? So if it costs more to serve someone in a particular class, then they pay more. And so that's part of the consultant is to figure that all out. Last year, and I pointed this out when it came before the finance committee, last year, because our costs were down and our revenues were up, the utility actually made $75 million of profit. Now, it doesn't go to the shareholders because you're the shareholders. It goes in the reserves. And so that will cushion us from having to have a big rate increase. Now, I'll just finish with this because I really want to turn it over to Miguel, but thank you for asking your question because I think all of us are concerned. One of the controversial issues that will get a lot of discussion is, will converting to renewable energy actually cost us more and can we afford it? Because that's our goal, is to go to 100% renewable by 2030. Yes, Jasmine.
Like, why can't we do things now?
Distant.
Every time I hear the company that's doing this, can actually say, you just said that 2020, 30,
Mhm,
it's
mhm.
always going for the future.
Yeah.
Can I say to the board?
So Jasmine's advocating for going to renewable right now. And we're on that path. My predecessor, and I have enormous respect for my predecessor, Felicia Williams served our city for 4 years. So this is not anything other than her concern was that going to renewable would triple electricity rates. We just got a report on what it will cost. The conservative estimates, and they are conservative, are between 5 and 23%. It would be the additional cost. And those are conservative numbers. I think the number will actually be probably net to zero because the cost of batteries is coming down, although tariffs may send that sideways. The cost of solar is definitely coming down. And with the troubles in the Middle East, the price of natural gas may spike, right? And so we may have all those things even out, but stay tuned and be involved in that process. There will be a very public process, and I will make sure it's transparent. That is, that you will know what's going on. Yes. And then I'll repeat it for the folks on Zoom. The question is, what types of non-renewable energy are being considered? They have to be carbon free. That is, they're not natural gas, they're not oil, they're not coal. We are going to wean ourselves off of coal. I think it's next year, Miguel, correct?
I think yes, that's
Yeah.
correct.
We now somewhat 40% of the electricity in Pasadena comes from a coal plant in Utah, but that contract ends next year. So that's the kind. So it'll be solar, it'll be wind, it'll be hydro. I'm sorry? That's a really good question. And again, I don't want, we will talk about this in depth, but the question is, where does the renewable energy come from? It comes from two sources, right? Far away and here at home, right? So the far away is the Hoover Dam for hydropower, some solar arrays out in the desert, wind power, you know, in the canyons between here and Palm Springs, etc. But a big push that the council wants to see is more local solar and local batteries. We have it in our house. We sailed through the interruptions due to the wind. We lost a lot of power in parts of the city. We did not have to because we have solar and we have batteries. So even when it was dark, the batteries kept our lights on. So for resilience and for meeting our carbon-free goals, local solar is a big part of that. And so we need to figure out how to make it easy and affordable for all of you to put solar on your roof and to have install batteries. That's the challenge ahead. I'm going to turn now to our city manager. Miguel, I had an opportunity to introduce you and say a little bit about your background. And I told him to be nice to you because you're on double duty tonight. And so, as I said, Miguel and our terrific finance director, Mr. Hawksworth, he presented, the two of them presented this presentation on the city's budget. It will both explain the laws that we operate under and how we allocate our dollars. And then we'll have a discussion. We'll get your perspective and your questions. So Miguel, I'll turn it over to you. And again, thank you to the folks who are on Zoom joining us.
Thank you, Councilmember Cole. And thank you all for being here. It's great to see this level of community engagement. For a long time, I thought it was just me, Matt, and Tim Park who could really get into budgets, but I guess all of you have that interest as well. But let me start by introducing Tim Park. He's the city's budget administrator. He and his team are the ones who truly put the budget together. And he's here to help answer any questions because he knows all the details that I don't know. So with that, let me start because there's a lot of material. I'm going to keep it high level. And of course, if we'll have questions and answers afterwards in case something didn't make sense. But, and you know, Matt Hawksworth is on vacation, well-deserved. Not only has he done terrific work keeping us stable in our finances, but he also was running the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, hours on end during the fires. And, you know, I'm encouraging my staff to take time off. And as we all should, because it was a very difficult and traumatic event. And maybe I shouldn't say, but he's in Hawaii. So good for him, enjoying the Hawaiian breeze. So starting out with these presentations, this is more of an accounting thing, but it'll become important as you understand how the city operates. There are four main types of funds. The first is the general fund. We love general fund because it's sometimes called discretionary revenues, and we can spend them as the council sees fit. As it says, there are no restrictions. Then there are special revenue funds. Those are funds from special taxes or other government programs that have specific requirements. They say, here's the money for stormwater, facility. We have to use it for that purpose. We can't change the purpose and use it for something else. There are enterprise funds. Enterprise is a term that comes from accounting, an enterprise account. And the biggest example is Pasadena Water and Power. The money that comes in from the utility. People pay for their water, people pay for their electricity. It goes into the enterprise account, I guess is what you call it. And they're enterprise funds. They can only be used for utility purposes. Excuse me. And then we have, one more time, internal service funds. The internal service funds are those funds that are collected from the different departments to provide collective services, human resources, fleet, any number of examples, benefits, IT, all those are done by the internal service departments and they have internal service funds. So how do we get our money? Our money comes from a variety of places, but the biggest one is general fund, or one of the biggest ones. Thank you so much. Overall, we have about a $1.1 billion budget, and about a third of it, it's done in three big chunks. A third of it is general fund or discretionary, a third of it is state and federal dollars, and a third of it is grants and other things, and about a third of it is federal, enterprise, the utility. Thank you. And then we also have a variety of other sources, gas tax, utility rates. You can see all the lists there of our different revenue sources. Now there's the other revenue that we earn. No, actually what came up here is kind of a trick here. You see, where's income tax? There is no income tax. We do not have local income tax. So I guess that's just a trick that Matt put in this presentation. Then you have here two major revenue categories and split in this way. It's taxes, fees, and charges. Those are meant to generate revenues, and they don't have to directly be related to a service. You can see the examples: impact fees, business license, in lieu fees, UUT, meaning utility user tax, and TOT, transient occupancy tax.
That's our hotel tax.
Our hotel tax. Yeah, everything has to have an acronym and a fancy name. So that's the taxes, fees, and charges. On the other side is the general fee schedule. And what's important on that general fee schedule is you see it's directly related to the cost of a service. We have to do fee studies. We have to see what it costs to provide the service. You may have been familiar last year. We looked at water rates. We looked at sewer rates. We looked at refuse rates. Those fall in this bucket. And the city has more than 1,400 unique fees, and we have to continually update them and make sure they match the cost of service, that they don't exceed the cost of service. So here's an interesting slide that shows the big four revenue sources on the general fund side. The biggest one is property tax. Property tax has a huge history in California. It's what Prop 13 was about. Back in the day, before Prop 13, how much you charge people on property tax, you had the same assessed valuation, and they would look at the money that was needed, and then it was a political decision for legislative bodies to make, to say, how much do we charge? Okay, this year it's 1.34%. This year it's 2%. This year, whatever it is. I think voters got tired of the volatility or the rates, and so they passed Prop 13 in 1978. It was a very simple proposition, but it basically said, take the valuation in 1978, go back 2 years to 1976. You get to, if you have your home, you hold that value, and it can only go up 2% a year, regardless of inflation, just 2% a year. So our property taxes are only going to go up by 2% a year. And then there's some adjustments if there are new construction, because that's going to be new property taxes that come online. And there's some adjustments if there are changes of ownership. If you sell your house that you have a lower assessed valuation on Prop 13, you sell it to somebody new, it gets reassessed at the current value. There's some exceptions if you're giving it to your children. We won't get into all that. It gets complicated, but that's essentially what Prop 13 did. In our property tax, there's an interesting bar that you can see on the right of this chart, and it shows that, here I sort of added them up in big pictures. Of every dollar that's collected in property tax, the county gets 28 cents. The city is the next one below, the blue, and it's 21 cents on the dollar. The next one's tricky because it's Pasadena Unified and it says 19.77 cents. But I think it was in the early 90s and then later on in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was state shortfalls. And the state used to say, hey, we needed more money. So they used to get it from local entities. So in 1992, they passed the first, what they call Educational Augmentation Fund, Educational Revenue Augmentation Fund. It's called ERAF. And that blue-green bar there is ERAF 1. And they took local resources and took it for the state for education. And then they did it again in the yellow bar, ERAF 2. And that's another 7.8%. So altogether, education gets 44 cents out of every dollar. And then the community college gets about 3.3 cents and everybody else gets about 3.47 cents. So that's how property taxes are split. We get 21 cents on the dollar is the bottom line and everybody else gets their share. That brings us $112 million out of our roughly $340 million of general fund. We also have sales tax. Sales tax, if you go buy anything at the store that's non-food and non-exempt, is going to be 10.25%. And that brings us another $76.6 million. You see the details there below, that's less important, but essentially we get 1% of that comes back to us, and then there's another percent that goes to the county pool, and we get 1% of that county pool. More important is to remember we get about $76 million of sales tax. Let me just editorialize here a little bit. The property tax is concerning because interest rates are still high. People are not feeling comfortable selling homes. Home sales are down. You'll see later on in the presentation, normally we get roughly 6 to 7% increase on our property tax year after year. And next year, we're projecting it down at 3.5%. I've been doing this work for a long time, but this is the lowest I've seen. I don't know if Tim has seen it any lower, but this is sad. Tim is saying, no, this is the lowest he has seen as well. So we're going to see some tough times on the property tax side. Sales taxes, what we're worried about is tariffs. If you put high tariffs on things like automobiles, I heard today that there's some thought that we might not have the tariffs on the automobiles, which would be terrific, only because if there are tariffs on sales, on 25% tariffs on autos, less people buy cars, less taxes, less revenues for us to get the work done that we need to do. The other two are utility users tax at 34 million and the TOT, the hotel tax, at 19.3 million. Those all add up to about $250 million of the 340 on general fund. We also have measures I and J, and I wasn't here. I got here in 2022, but you might help me. That measure I and J was 2020, maybe it's 2020. Measure I added another 0.75 or 3/4 sales tax.
It must have been 2018 because it says here became effective on April 1st, 2019.
Okay.
So yeah, it was, you all voted for two measures. One measure increased the sales tax by 3/4 cent. And the second measure said, if it passes, should the city give 1/3 to the school district and keep 2/3? And both of those passed. So each year since, the school district gets 1/3 of Measure I revenue.
And you can see this fiscal year, we're forecasting about 33 million in Measure I funds, and then pursuant to the Measure J advisory measure, 2/3 of that, about 22 million goes to the city and 11 million goes to the school district. And you can see the details about how that's collected. That's how we get our revenue in the big picture. Now let's look at expenses. So our biggest expense is going to be personnel. And you can see this past year, the current fiscal year that we're in, the fiscal year goes July 1st, 2024 to June 30th, 2025. We had a growth factor in our personnel costs of 5.7%. Some of the reasons that went up is the contribution rates for pension are always high. The total cost for, there's two groups of employees, there's safety and non-safety. Safety are police and fire. Everybody else is non-safety by and large. So non-safety, we pay for every dollar we pay in wages, we have to pay 35.98% for pensions. And in safety, it's even more. It's for every dollar we pay in wages, we have to pay 57 and 78 cents on for pensions. In addition, we have to pay benefits and workers' comp. And then the other side of what we pay a lot on is services and supplies, all the contract work that we do. And you see that go up oftentimes by the cost of inflation, just like people like saying the price of eggs, and that's true. Eggs are really expensive. It has more to do with bird flu, but not just eggs have gotten expensive. There has been a period of inflation. And of course, inflation, we buy things at the city, just like everybody buys things in their household. Here's a little more information on expenditures. I mentioned earlier, we have internal services departments. So, we have to, maintain our buildings, have IT services, maintain our fleet, replace our fleet, all of that comes into the mix when we create a budget. We have capital outlay. Historically, we've provided very, very little general fund discretionary dollars to capital. I think it's usually about $1 million. This year alone, we're gonna, right now, we're gonna take in the next few weeks to the council discussions about the capital plan. And it's intended to add this year, I think it was 449 million, something like that. And only one of those millions is general fund. We just don't have a lot of general fund. In the last 2 years, I've been able to find, given discussions I've had with the council and their decision-making about priorities, find about $5 million a year in one-time general fund dollars to go to streets. Our streets are very important. We want good streets. We want solid streets. We don't want potholes everywhere. And we need to maintain them. And so I'm hunting right now as we speak for another one-time $5 million addition. I just saw I was at another community meeting a minute ago. When I got here, our PCI, which is a pavement condition index, was at 53. And I just saw that this year, or in 2024, we're at 57. We want to be in the 80s, but we have a way to go on this. But the good news is we're making progress.
The pavement condition index is 0 to 100. It's the same in Glendale, in Torrance, in Los Angeles. It's a standard measure. It's one of the few things that you can measure, like crime rates, you can measure between cities. And like grades in school, 90 is an A, 80 is a B, 70 is a C, and we're at 57.
But when I hired a new public works director, he came from San Gabriel. I don't remember the exact numbers, but he inherited a system in the 50s and he got it into the, I think, low 80s. And that was music to my ears. And I think I'm hoping he does the same here. So let's look at our budget projections for this next fiscal year on the general fund side. So as I mentioned earlier, property tax for this year is up. We thought it was going to be at 4.2%, but it's actually up through February 2025 at 4.6%. So that's a little bit of good news. However, we have slower growth next year projected. And it looks like we're going to get that 3.5% increase, which again is relatively low compared to the price of everything else.
And pardon me for interrupting again, Miguel, but again, remember our years are July 1 to June 30th. So when he says next year, this year, he means the fiscal year. We're 3/4 of the way through this fiscal year, and our new year starts on July 1st. We don't have a parade, but it's important in city government.
Yep. So you remember last year we had 112 million. This year it looks like we're projecting about 116 million. So 4 million more, but still the rate of growth has slowed down quite a bit. Sales tax has already been flat for more than a year. And in this current fiscal year, again, July 1st to June 30th, it's projected to be $2 million lower than we had budgeted. So that's unfortunate. And growth in the next year is projected to be at 3.6% for fiscal year 26 and 3.2% for fiscal year 27. You can see that slowdown in growth, which is problematic. And the note here is important. Recent federal actions such as tariffs, ongoing inflationary challenges will in fact negatively impact our forecasts. And then finally, there's just a note here about the hotel tax. It'll get a one-time boost, which will be helpful based on the many stays that happened during the Eaton fire. A lot of people had to evacuate their homes and stay in hotels, but that's expected to come down, of course. And we also lost a lot of people coming to visit because they thought the fires had done more damage than they did. Well, they did tremendous damage, Thankfully in Pasadena, I think we had 147 dwelling units that were, maybe it's 117, 147 structures, 117 dwelling units, something like that. So the damage here was, relatively limited, and the convention center stayed open and the Rose Bowl stayed open. All our facilities are still open and available to the public, but the hotel revenues may have some longer term impacts because of that. Utility user tax revenues, they vary quite a bit. We're looking at an increase of about 3.46%. And then taxes and franchise fees, meaning the whole, everything I just talked about, that's about $265 million out of $340 million of general fund. I did the math as I was preparing, and that's about 78% of the money. And then we have to look at initial forecasts for fees, permits, and charges are showing either flat or declining revenues. So other funds, let's look at that. We're gonna, as I mentioned earlier, on that bucket where I said it was on the right-hand column of one of the slides where it has to match the cost of service. We're looking at doing what they call cost of service studies and get rate approval so we can true up those fees to what the cost is so that we have a little more resources to get the work done. We had done part of the problem is during the pandemic, I think the council wisely said, let's not raise rates. People are going through tough times. And so we put a freeze on rate increases. But then, of course, all of our reserve funds for those in those areas, they started going down almost into the negative. So last year, we had a very hard year where we had to raise refuse rates, sewer rates, and water rates all at the same time. And that was tough. We don't want that to happen again. So we're going to try to do those staggered over time, one a year, so that everybody could plan a little bit better and make it a little easier to make those payments. We have things like the gas tax, which just doesn't keep up. We love that people have electric cars. I have an electric car myself, but the truth is now that I have my electric vehicle, I use very little gas, right? Because I had to keep a hybrid for long trips and whatnot. But I use very little gas. And that means there's less gas tax revenues to do things like street paving. Let's see, other special revenues are not able to recoup all the costs due to state law or other regulatory requirements. I won't go into that. It's complicated, but the way government money works, special revenue funds end up not being enough for what we need. And that's true on the next bullet point. We get a lot of grant revenues. They say you can only spend so much on administration. The cost of living in California is much higher than it is in other places. So it doesn't, when we say, oh, look, we did a good job. We got $10 million for this program. It won't cover our full administrative costs. So we have to use general fund subsidy. You can see over time with all of our grants and everything we're doing, it says the cost allocation plan has a gap of more than $5.5 million in general fund dollars just to be able to collect grant revenues that are supposed to support the services for which they were given. But it really does take a toll on the dollars that we have. So what are we going to do next year? Budget guidance. Every budget cycle is challenging because you have to, by state law, balance the budget. In other words, unlike I think we're going to do questions a little bit later. Unlike the federal government, we can't print money. We can't have a deficit. We can't have a national debt. They're good at that in DC, but we're not allowed. They don't allow anybody else to do that, not the state, not local government. So we're by law required to have a projection of expenditures that meet revenues. So due to economic uncertainty and fiscal pressures on the budget, we are continuing to evaluate spending and tighten our belts whenever possible. That's really important. I think when we met with the council, it was very clear that they've realized how the revenues are coming in, how the expenses are going up. If we're going to want to take on new challenges and do things differently, we're going to be forced. And it's a good practice to look at our existing programs, look at the ones that are working and keep at it, and look at the ones that aren't working and pivot. And so that's going to be an exercise that we hopefully will engage in with the leadership of the council in the coming months and years. There's what's called the base budget, very important piece of the document. It's the base budget takes the accumulation of all the decisions the city council has made over years, how many people they said to hire, the programs they said are okay. And you start with that as your base budget. You say, okay, here's the base budget for last year. Let's now add all the increased costs of salaries, benefits, pensions, insurance, everything, and roll it up and say, without making any changes, what's our base budget? The base budget, it says here leaves minimal financial capacity for new programs. That's really true. Just to get to next year's base budget, it pretty much takes up all of our ongoing revenues. So what are our short-term solutions? Those are okay. We're gonna have a bunch of them, but we need to think about longer-term solutions. And general fund is 1/3 of the problem, but we also have to look at all of our funds, our enterprise funds and our grants, and pursue new revenues anywhere we can get them. I put together a team to look at grants. They're having great success. They're bringing in lots of money. But we're doing it as a concerted effort as a team across city departmental lines because we're one city and we need to be as effective as we can to get as many grant dollars as we can. As it says, how do we stop doing something? It's a lot harder than you think. We're going to have those hard discussions and take direction from the city council. And then finally, legislative advocacy is very, very important, both at the state level and the federal level, to advocate to get our fair share. I'll just, again, go off script here and talk about a horrible Tuesday morning, shortly after the new administration took office, when we got a memo in the morning and it said, $3 trillion. I know you go like this for billion to do Austin Powers. I don't know how you even signal trillion. It's so much money. And we're going to freeze $3 trillion. For us, federal dollars is about 51 or something million, somewhere between 50 and 60. It depends on the year. It's a lot of money to lose in one morning on one memo. I think by lunchtime, I got another memo and we're getting all our federal lobbyists saying, here's what's going on. It was like full on panic mode. By lunchtime, they said, no, we only mean the revenues that affect these particular executive orders. So, okay, well, how much does that mean for us? We're trying to figure that out. By the afternoon, they said, no, it's only these handful of executive orders. We're like, well, how much is that? And by the next morning, they said, never mind. It affects nothing. That's hard to budget around. That's hard to have certainty. And that's just one example of the kind of things that we're dealing with. That was one day and it was a horrible day because we really were thinking, wow, this is how they're going to come out and really take away all these federal revenues. I think what they learned is that a lot of people are dependent on a lot of the programs. I think as they made these broad cuts, they thought they were so clever and they heard from their constituents that, hey, this hurts. We need this money. You can't cut this. And I think that I say all that because we need all of you to be engaged, listen, and advocate. All right. So how is the organization itself funded? We have, I think it's 18 departments, and you can see they're sort of split up. Our big departments are water and power, by far the biggest. And that's where I say it's 1/3 of our $1.1 billion. Police is big, public works, fire, transportation, and housing. Those are all 40 million and above. Then you have your mid-sized departments. I'm not going to read them all, but you can see what they are. And then we have our smaller departments, which are human resources, rent stabilization, the city clerk, and I think smallest of all, city council. Small but mighty.
They're trying to figure out how 8 people are worth $3.5 million. It's not our salaries, I can tell you that.
Yeah. And budgets are always complicated. It's hard to do one-on-one. There's some other dollars in there for sure. And the salaries that the council member makes, I don't know what they are, but they're in the charter.
$20,000.
Yeah. And they do so much work for $20,000 a year. So even before getting out of the gate, here are some of the big expenses we have. And I think this is for fiscal year 25. Let me look at Tim. Is that right? Yeah, these are for the current fiscal year. We're paying 42 million in pensions. We just can't get out of that. We made a promise to our employees to provide pensions, and that's 42 million. Then we have debt service. That's both city and PCOC is the Pasadena. It's the convention center. I'm not sure what it stands for.
Pasadena Center Operating Company.
Yeah. So the PCOC,
That's the convention center, the civic auditorium, and the visitor and convention bureau are all called PCOC.
And we have debt that we have to pay. And I'm pleased to tell you, we are very responsible. We have one of the highest credit ratings, which is not just to say, yeah, good job, pat on the back. It determines what we can sell our debt for, which determines how much we have to pay in interest. So because we are fiscally manage ourselves in fiscally prudent ways. We have a very high bond rating, which means we pay very low money when we borrow. When I first got here, and I got here in August 29th, 2022, essentially September. A couple of months later, we had an election and Measure L was on. And that was an extension of the library parcel tax, and that, that gives us money to operate the library. I forget how much, might be like 5 million. How much is Measure L? 3.5 million. But it also requires us, if the voters are gonna do parcel tax and pay 3.5 million, then we have to it requires that we provide a general fund contribution to the library. And that's at 12.6 million, and that's by formula. We give to PUSD, the Pasadena Unified School District, 10.7 million, that 1/3 of the Measure I dollars. There's a slide later on, I'm gonna show you on insurance that is try not to get emotional about it, but it's difficult to see.
Well,
But
some of you are feeling the pain on
Yes.
insurance.
just like you feel the pain, we feel the pain. But insurance is about 10.2 million a general fund, 15.9 million overall. And then you can see the rest. I'm not going to go through them, but it's much smaller general fund commitments to a variety of different sources.
I wonder, Miguel, since we've had you talk for half an hour and I don't want your voice to give out, maybe now would be a time to pause for some questions and then you can resume.
Or can I do
because
one more slide
Absolutely.
to get them animated? Because what I was going to say that is hard to watch.
All right.
Here's the slide. And let me go over. The first slide is what's called our excess general liability insurance. In 2016, we were paying $335,000, and we had a self-insured retention. You can think of that as your deductible of $1 million. So if we got hit with the case, the first $1 million was on the city, and beyond that, we had excess coverage. And we got charged $335,000. If you look at next year's projection, they've now said the first $5 million is on us. So think about it. We don't have many cases that go above 5 million, but the first 5 million is on the city for every case that we get sued, and they want to charge us $6.8 million. So we went just from 2016 till now, we went from 335,000 that we used to pay to 6.8 million. And even just last year, if you look closely, it was about 5.2 million or so, and it's going up to 6.8. So a $1.6 million increase. Thank you so much. On our excess insurance liability. And then the other one on the side is less money, but it's the same pattern on property insurance. It's gone up tremendously. So hopefully that doesn't make you too mad. It makes me upset, but it's what we have to live with. I don't want to just blame insurance companies. Yes, insurance companies are making a lot of money and all that. They always make money. But it's also true that there are lots of runaway juries, runaway verdicts. You saw the most recent one, guy spilled a cup of tea on his lap and he got $50 million. That comes from somewhere, and you see it reflected in his rates.
And we as county taxpayers are on the hook for $4 billion in the recent settlement over quite a number of cases over quite a number of years of sexual abuse that took place in some of our prisons and juvenile camps. $4 billion the county is paying out to settle lawsuits. So we had some hands up. I wanted to and we got more. Let's pause now. We have more information, but this is a lot of information and I want you to understand it. So we'll start in the back, Michael, and speak up loudly and I'll repeat it if you don't.
Hopefully I'm loud enough. Just curiosity, where do the penalties go, such as parking, such as what's levied by certain routes, what's levied by the permit center and all that? Is that all going to the general fund or is it going to different funds?
Miguel, do you want to tackle that question? The question for the folks on Zoom is the particular funds like parking fines, building permit fees, where does that go? Does that go into the general fund or is that set aside?
I'm going to ask Tim Park. He knows exactly the answer and I don't, because everything's complicated. But again, Tim Park, Budget Administrator.
Good evening, everyone. So citation revenue relates to parking throughout the city. When those are issued, the money goes into the general fund. However, when it's building permits, it goes, as Miguel alluded to earlier, there's a special revenue fund. So that's a restricted purpose. So those will go into what we call internally as the building services fund, and it's dedicated to certain activity.
Again, under Proposition 218, which is part of our state constitution, we can't charge building permits more than it costs us to issue them. And so that's why it's segregated. We are allowed to charge whatever we want for parking. So that's why it's not restricted and can go in the general fund. You had a follow-up, Michael?
Other penalties that are levied like against all of the, what you smoke. You had a question in there.
I'm sorry, Michael, could you repeat it? For what?
Shops.
Oh, so,
Yeah, we. I
It
guess
depends,
depending on the
yes.
activity, there's like a dedicated fund. So depending on what's being cited, it will go to that respective fund. But in most cases, largely it'll go to the general.
and one thing to keep in mind, and I think this is still accurate from my days as a city manager 5 years ago, when you get a speeding ticket, you really get hit. It's a couple $100. 94% of that goes to the state. The police officer, on behalf of the city, we get about 6%. Am I about right on that? Speeding tickets, moving violations.
Absolutely.
But when the state got into trouble, they said, we got to run the courts. So we're going to run the courts on money from moving violations and traffic violations. Again, parking comes to the city's general fund. But the vast majority of money, when we give you a ticket for running a stoplight or speeding, that goes to the state to support the courts. Over here, sir.
5.7.
Yes. Yes.
Why that's so high? Cut that down, so I can cut down.
So the question is, again, I'm going to repeat the question just so the people online can hear. If our revenues are not going up by 5.7, but our costs of staffing are going up by 5.7, what's the explanation for, are people getting a 5.7% salary increase?
No, we have 11 bargaining units and then we have non-represented employees, which is a smaller number. Most employees in the city are part of a labor union. So we negotiate contracts. Within the contracts, there tends to be what they call a COLA or a cost of living adjustment. That tends to be 3 to 4%-ish, depending on, whatever's negotiated on each contract. So that's going to be usually 3.5, 4%. But on top of that, the 5.7%, I think it was, and it's even higher next year, and I'll explain why. But the 5.7% includes increases in pension, in healthcare costs. The benefits get very expensive. Healthcare has been going up in double digits for a long, long time, and we got to cover our employees.
That's a good factual answer. The buck stops, though, not with the city manager, it stops with us. We are the ones who approve those labor contracts. And I have not had any come before me. But one of the concerns I have, and I am very pro-labor, but one of the concerns I have is that it's one thing in the private sector where you're negotiating between a private company and a labor union. Another thing in the public sector where the public sector can actually hire their own bosses by campaign contributions that influence how contracts get negotiated. So I think there needs to be a lot of transparency around that. And I think we're seeing that in Los Angeles. And by the way, we have a Pasadena resident who is a distinguished guest. My friend and former colleague, Chris Thompson, was Mayor Bass's chief of staff when she was inaugurated. So welcome, Chris. Glad to see you here. But no, but labor contracts are and pensions. Pensions are a very expensive part of public employment. They're a very important part of public employment. I happen to believe in defined benefit pensions. I wish all of us, private sector and public sector, had them. I think they've been stripped out of the private sector, but they are very expensive. And there may need to be continued reforms, particularly if the stock market tanks. We're going to again see pension costs go up. Did you have one more comment?
Basically, how
How many employees and will there be an increase in the number this year?
I don't know the exact number, but it's roughly 2,400 employees citywide. We have only increased modestly in the last year. I don't know if, Tim, you know the number of how employees we increased year over year. And this year, as I said, we're having trouble meeting just revenues and expenses. So there may be a handful of increases, but not a lot. There's not a lot of room left. Do you know how many we increased last year?
Don't know, but it was 2,400 that, the city manager mentioned, that also includes the operating companies, so that's about 150 entities, so really the city total is more like 2,300, but year over year, it's probably less than 10%.
So it's a good question, one to keep in mind, and it is a big driver. About 70% of the general fund goes to salaries, benefits, and pensions. Over here.
Voters approved 200 million for the library rebuild.
Well, 195, but who's counting?
Of solar on the roof, because, hang on, Pasadena 100 is all through this room, and we're talking about having solar in the city. Library would be a perfect.
A little bit off topic to the budget.
Budget needs public accountability.
Sure.
And visibility, not after, as in this case, the, sorry, I've got to get this up in front of me because it's city speak. That the capital improvement has already gone for review for something that the public hasn't had any knowledge of, so.
So the question is, again, for the folks online, is why not solar on the roof of the rehabilitated library? This is something I personally favor, but the concern is historic authenticity. The library is a National Register landmark. And so there's concern that if we put solar on the roof, it will spoil our National Register status. Again, personally, I think that solar would be a symbol of the fact that Pasadena continues to evolve and grow. But we'll have a discussion about that before the library plans are finalized. And there is an opportunity to put solar in the parking lot on the back. Unfortunately, that's on the other side of a south-facing building. So it won't get as much sun as if it was on the roof. Andre, Andre, hold for 1 second, because I have a couple of questions from folks on Zoom. I don't want to leave them out. One question is from Maria, where can we find the budget proposal? Is it online? I think I can handle that one. The capital budget proposal is online in 2 places. It's online in the finance department website. So if you go in the city and you ask for the capital budget, excuse me, which is now new, you will find the latest capital budget for next year on the finance webpage. Finance department webpage, and you will also find it in the finance committee from I think last week and the council agenda for this week. So there's, I guess, 3 places you can find it listed on.
Public Works Department's website.
Okay, and the Public Works Department website. So that's the capital budget. Our city manager will be presenting the next year's operating budget in May. So that was not out yet. He is still finishing that.
But last year's budget and I think prior year's budgets are all online.
And not only the budgets, but the accounting, which is called the ACFR. That's the All Funds Comprehensive Report, which lists not just what we plan to spend, but what we actually spend. So Andre, thank you for your patience.
My question is for City Manager Marquez. City Manager Marquez, given your experience in Santa Clara and maybe multiple agencies, how do you see Pasadena leveraging tools like the enhanced infrastructure financing district or creative revenue streams like digital billboard revenue to boost economic development and support partnerships that deliver housing and services.
Okay, that was a mouthful, but again, for the Zoom audience, Andre asks, given your experience in Santa Clara County, are there creative ways to enhance revenue, such as the enhanced finance infrastructure districts, enhanced infrastructure finance district, I think it is,
Yeah.
EIFD, which is a state form of borrowing money and then paying it back through later property tax revenue. And then, for example, digital billboards, which are being used for the convention center in downtown LA. You see some possibilities there?
Yeah, I see lots of possibilities. One of the answers, as I said earlier, stop doing what's not working, keep investing in what is, but pivoting so that we can have new revenues to do more things. But the other answer is always to find new revenues. The Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District, EIFD, is what they call tax increment financing. It's a form of tax increment financing. We're looking at that now, trying to hire, it's complicated, so we need to hire consultants to help us. But with the 710 stub, I don't want to, it gets way too complicated with tax increment financing, but it's a way to use the property tax revenues on a particular piece of property. You freeze the base value. Later, as the property gains value, it grows, and then between the base year that's frozen and the current value, you get what's called tax increment, and you can bond around that and then do terrific things for infrastructure and for economic development. But all new, yes to all new and additional revenues.
So we'll take one more from Zoom and three more from the audience, then we'll go back to Miguel's presentation, and we'll have more opportunity, not just for questions, but also your comments at the end. So one more question from Zoom. This goes to the cost of insurance. Which city department has the highest number of lawsuits filed against it?
I've seen the numbers. I get, I call them the P departments, but it's either Pasadena Water and Power or Police or Public Works. But between those are by far among the three, they get the most lawsuits. Public Works because people fall on sidewalks and whatever else, and so they
Trees
file
fall on
lawsuits.
them.
What's that?
Trees fall on
And
them?
trees fall on things. We have a lot of trees, beautiful urban forests, but the trees get sick and branches fall. And then police, it's largely, I think they have the smallest number in terms of the big three, but they have the highest payouts. And so, that's going to catch my attention, the three Ps.
And you may have read, and this is concerning, and there's nothing we can talk about in public, but there are a number of personnel lawsuits now affecting our police department, which is concerning. People in the department actually suing the department and personnel in the department. Again, that's not something we can talk about publicly at the moment, but I can tell you it has the attention of our city manager, our city attorney, and our city council.
And maybe I can add, I think this is important. I agree that money just goes out the door. That money is part of our rating for why insurance goes up. So we need to get those under control. When I got here, we did not have a risk management division. And so I created one. And we, for example, when we start every budget and not every budget presentation, as Tim knows, the two of us sit in all of them. We start with, what are your numbers? How many workers' comp injury did you have? How many liability claims did you have? What are you doing this next year to fix the problem if we're seeing a pattern? And I'm pleased to report the numbers are starting to go down.
Okay, three questions, and then we'll go back. Sonia.
Debt service at 25 million for city and PCOC. Does any of that include the huge debt on the Rose Bowl, which is supposed to be paid, the annual debt service, which is supposed to be paid by the Rose Bowl operating company?
It does not.
So the Rose Bowl operating company is going to pay for the debt.
That's correct.
And the figure here, the debt service, the PCOC portion. This is mentioned earlier, that the TOT revenue generator, almost 2/3 of that is dedicated to the PCOC.
Yes.
Thank you for this wonderful forum. In preparation for this, I searched the city website for information about the operating budget and found nothing. Doesn't mean that there wasn't something somewhere, but I couldn't find it. However, I found an excellent slide presentation to the planning commission that had a wonderful chart that detailed the exact process and timetable for the capital budget.
Mhm.
So why is this in something for the city council, and we as taxpayers are ignorant of it? That's all right for the city commission.
Mhm.
And before that particular meeting, there was another version of a slide presentation to the Northwest Commission. And that included a list of very specific line items that were of a special benefit to Northwest Pasadena. Well, good for them, but why don't the rest of us hear about what's affecting our neighborhoods? Now, state and federal budgets are widely discussed and publicly debated.
Let me catch up with you, Jeanette, a little bit like a trend. Hold, I want to catch up with you. Oh, no, I'm not going to interrupt you. You get to ask the question, Jeanette. I just want.
Permission for this, you'll look for another permission for that. There should be something for the public, even if it just says, will be coming at such and such a time. That's helpful. Anyway, thank you very much.
Jeanette asked a great compound question. I just wanted to, I'm not sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to catch up for the folks who can't hear you on Zoom. So I wanted to, like a Spanish translator, I wanted to catch up with you. So she prefaced her question by saying she looked on the website and could not find information on the operating budget, but did find a presentation on the capital budget timeline for the Planning Commission. She also found on the agenda of the Northwest Commission a breakdown of line items that affect the Northwest, but why isn't there the same information for the rest of the city? And her question, I mean, now I'm trying to catch up. Her question was, why do you have to hunt around in different places for this kind of information? And so we will, by the way, share with you, when Miguel's done, I will pull up the website where you can find all the city's financial documents. But it's a good question. We need to make it easy to find. And clearly, for someone as informed as you did not find it easy to find, although you managed to find a number of other things on the city's website. So thoughts about how to make this more accessible?
Yeah, so things are complicated. So you have the capital budget and the operating budget. The capital budget happens first, or the process does. So we've already had that. They've gone to the Northwest Commission for projects there, but they've also taken it to the Planning Commission. So they take all new projects. The Planning Commission is charged under state law to make a finding, I think is what they say, that whatever we're planning to do on the capital side is in conformance with the general plan. And so that's the Planning Commission is citywide. The Northwest, I think, is for the Northwest section. And so they highlight those projects. I think they might go to Parks and Rec Commission and some other commissions. So there's a lot of vetting. Now the capital budget is a little bit ahead in process. The operating budget, which is to come, I think Tim is working and his team are working now. We present that in detail for each department to various committees of the council, public safety, municipal services, finance, ed tech, and there's probably one more I'm missing, ledge policy. That schedule is still being worked out. It's council members are all full-time, they have their full-time jobs. So to get them, find time when they're available, so we can make the presentation to them it's a much bigger task than you would imagine. And so they're in the process of doing that. As soon as those dates are set, we'll make it available to the public. We would love the public to participate in those discussions.
And the spirit of Jeanette's question is one that I share and embrace, right? I really deeply believe that we need financial literacy for the public. It's your tax dollars. And that's what tonight is about. You come out, we've got another 20 people on Zoom, I think. You've come out, and this is in a district of 20,000 people, right? And not everybody is even in my district, right? So I think it's wonderful you're here. I wish we had 3 times as many people here. People have their lives, they have their kids, they have lots of stuff going on. but it's your money, and I think it's really important that we do everything we can. I spent 4 hours on Sunday knocking on doors. I've knocked on 900 doors since the election. Sometimes people say, "What? I thought you just got elected." Exactly. I don't want to disappear. I think we sometimes expect the people to come to the government. And I deeply believe it's the responsibility of the government to come to the people. And so that's why I'm knocking on doors and asking people to come out to these things, tune in on Zoom. I want to raise the level of understanding so that you can meaningfully participate in these decisions. That doesn't mean that you spend 5 nights a week going to city commission meetings. That's unrealistic for anybody but Diane Kirby. But it's I do. And Mike Warner. But it does mean that you should have, conversant understanding of where your money is going. And so that's what tonight is about. One more question, and then we'll have more questions at the end. Diane.
Wondering, we've talked a lot about increasing revenue. How do you decrease costs? As a, person who runs a household, I have so much money. So how can I spend it? What do I need to cut out? Have you given any thought to expenditures that you could cut?
Yeah, I think that's what I was expressing, and the council and I and my team had a discussion about it, and the council, I think, came to the wise conclusion, we have to look and assess those programs that are not getting us the outcomes that we are hoping for, and saying, hey, let's stop doing that. We got to stop doing some things. Completely agree with that. We have all kinds of other processes to try and, a good example on the capital side, we got the authority through a charter amendment. And I want to thank you all. We've put up, since I've been here, 9 different initiatives for the voters to weigh in on, and all of them have been approved. One of them gave us the authority to look at alternate project delivery methods. That's meant to lower costs, do things faster and cheaper. So we're looking everywhere we can to run leaner and reprioritize. Now, ultimately, that's a council decision, but it's our job as staff and I've instructed my department heads, you guys have the best knowledge of what's going on in your departments. You need to tell me so I can tell the council, here's what we think. But ultimately, it's going to be a policy decision by the council overall, which programs to start, what else to do that's new. But we are looking to cut costs everywhere we can.
We'll continue with the questions after Miguel completes his presentation, and he'll move through it fairly quickly now.
Yeah, we have only 6 or 7 slides left. So what's highlighting, if last year was 5.7% increase, next year we're projecting budget to go, personnel to go up by 8.2%. Big reason for that, if you look at the salaries, it says salary, but that has to do a very complicated thing with how many vacancies we have, and we're doing well without having too many vacancies. We have to do some what are called classification and compensation studies. That's where we're going to lose all our employees if we don't match what Glendale is paying, what Burbank is paying, not match, but enough that they don't leave us to make a few extra dollars. And then MOU increases. I can't think of an MOU. MOU is Memorandum of Understanding with the unions. I can't think of one increase that's less than 3%, nor can I think of one that's more than 4%. So I think they're all between 3% and 4%, which would be in line with what the increase in the money that we're getting. The bigger issue, look at, the pensions, non-safety is only going up 4.6%, but safety pensions, which are a big part of what cities do, police and fire, are going up 16.6%, and medical premiums are going up 9%. Those numbers are much higher than the 3.5% that we're getting an increase on. Then you have your service and supply budgets. You remember that's the other big category. And even though, CPI or Consumer Price Index, I think it stands for, but inflation is down to 3.3%. But look at what happened to us with palm tree pruning. Used to cost $64 a tree in 2019, fiscal year 2019. And 4 years later, in fiscal year 23, it's $99 per tree. That's a 55% increase. That's what, 12 or 13% year over year. As they say in the commercials, but wait, there's more. Internal service charges, that usually goes up based on personnel growth. But we also found that we just weren't recovering enough. We did an audit. We have an internal, in terms of trying to do things better, we also have an internal audit function that reports to the finance/audit committee. And they're out there trying to find ways for us to operate more efficiently and better. But we learned in the process that we were not charging departments enough for the gasoline and fuel and diesel that they're using. And so that's going to go up by 43% in order to capture that cost. And that adds some money. Now, the big one that I said, wait, there's more. Fire engines, our poor fire engines during the pandemic, we were trying to focus on getting people vaccinated. All the money went to things like that. And we neglected buying some fire engines, for example. So when I get here, I think our fire engines had nearly 300,000 miles on them, and they become less reliable, and they're in their shop. And if you need emergency services, we need to get there as soon as possible. In 2021, a fire engine cost $977,000. That's a lot of money. But in 2025, 4 years later, that's now $1.45 million. It's a 49% increase. I get outraged because I know the backstory that hedge funds went out and bought all the companies that make fire engines, and then suddenly they became more expensive. So, you know, that's a huge increase, 49% over a 4-year period. And then, you know, they note here, we use a lot of Ford F-Series trucks, but they use a lot of aluminum, and there's going to be the tariffs on aluminum and steel. This is a lot of numbers with a lot of red. This is the general fund 5-year forecast. You know, as I told you, because the expenses are growing faster than revenues, you're going to expect to see red. I'll go through this slide quickly, and there's another slide. The first slide was what happened when we did the budget in June of 24. And then 6 months later, because sales tax revenue's down, because some other increases, this is what it looked like in December. But here's the comparison of what's important. You can see that in June of 2024, we thought we'd have a net operating loss of about 1.9 million. But then you can see that in December of 2024, that grew to 5 million, by about $3 million. So that's concerning. We're going to have to find ways to make up that difference. Good news. We've got to pepper things, good news and bad news. As I said, or maybe I said it in the last community meeting, we've been very focused on trying to be prudent and to have stable reserves. So we have a policy, we have an operating reserve goal of 5% of general fund revenues, and that's reflected here at 16 million. An emergency reserve of 15% of annual expenditures, or 48 million. And then we have what are called Section 115 trusts. We have one for the pension and one for OPEB, which means other post-employment benefits. Again, sorry for the alphabet soup, but we have 13.6 million and 2.57 million. I added them all up, and well, at one point it's around 80 million in reserves. So that's, I think we have, you know, very difficult times, choppy waters ahead of us because of the federal government. Let's just be honest. And I'm glad that we are fully reserved to help weather that storm. And, you know, we're going to try to keep our hands off it. It's a policy decision to stay strong, but we have it there if we need it so that we don't get caught flat-footed. So what are we going to do this next year? We're going to continue to refine revenues and expenditures, looking at all the information we can get our hands on before we go to the council. I have here on my notes, you know, we also got hit by the wildfire. That's a big deal. And so we have 3 buckets of revenues that may come in, at least in my head, how I think about it. We have insurance. We do have property insurance. That's why we paid that money. You all saw it go up. So we're trying to collect as much insurance money as we can get. We're trying to be as diligent as we can be, and we work so hard to get our maximum amount of money from FEMA. And then we also sued Edison. Just yesterday, I read that Edison said, well, maybe one of our de-energized lines that we energized might have been responsible. So they're slowly getting there. I think if we can get them to admit that it was their power lines that caused the fire, then, you know, if you don't know, I think it might have been mentioned, I'm a lawyer by training. I used to be a judge, so I understand the law real well in this area. And there's what's called but-for causation. And so I've told all my department heads, add up your expenses, and but for the fire, would you have been doing this? If the answer is no, put it on the list, and let's try to seek reimbursement from what's called the tortfeasor. What is called the tortfeasor in the law. And then finally, the last bullet point is about a measure that was approved by the voters, I think, Tim, in 2020, where in 2020, the amount of the, what's called the general fund transfer from the utility went from 16% down to 12%. And as you can see there, we need, the charter requires us to do that 12% transfer. It says the transfer of such amount from the light and power fund would be, we do it unless the transfer of such amount from the light and power fund would be detrimental to the proper functioning and administration of the power utility during the budget year under consideration. As Councilmember Cole said, we've been managing the utility very prudently to the point that, you know, we have one of the lower rates around, yet we were able to generate net income. It's, you know, it's not a profit-making entity. It belongs to all of you, all of us. And we're going to be able to take the full 12% as required by the charter this year, which is going to help us balance our budget. So I think that's all we had. And of course, Tim, if you can stay up here, because you're the man with all the true knowledge, and we'll let Councilmember Cole field more questions for us.
And just one small point. Again, I am deeply appreciative of the city manager coming out not only to the meeting beforehand, but to our meeting tonight and going into detail on all of this. This is, he doesn't get overtime.
Notice Tim.
And same with our budget officer. I spoke out yesterday at the council meeting, and then I was in Pasadena now this morning. I'm calling for fundamental reform. I think we're on automatic pilot. I think several of you sort of alluded to this. We just keep doing what we've always done, except it's a little more costly every year. And we're really going to have to think about, does everything we do need to be done? Does everything we need to, that we've been doing, need to be done the way we do it? And I think in the modern world, we're going to have to change some of those things. That will be wrenching, because everybody that is, everything we do, there are people who do it and they think it's important and they care about their job. And so they're going to say, well, let's keep doing this. And it is very difficult to change the way things are being done, because we've always done it that way. And that's what Pasadena is particularly prone to that. But there have been successes in the past in Pasadena with changing things. And we are going to need to draw upon that legacy of success, because we're going to need to make some fundamental changes going forward. We are not in the position of LA County, which is asking for a 3% of a decrease in virtually all of the departments. We're not in the condition of where I work, the city of Los Angeles, which is facing almost $1 billion budget shortfall. And so we have a lot to be proud of as a city, but we cannot rest. We cannot sit on our assets. We need to be proactive, and we need to plan ahead, and we need to tackle this $2 billion investment in our infrastructure as an older city. And I will need you to be part of that. And so let's turn to your questions again. Yes. And you can just say it and then I'll repeat it.
Yeah, so this is kind of a big picture question, and that is, we could be facing quite a recession soon. And so I'm kind of wondering, there's two parts to this question. What are we doing to anticipate that in the city? And also, when I heard that the number of employees in the city was going up by maybe something around 10%, that seemed to me like a lot. And so some of the things that run through my mind when that's happening is, are these new projects? Is this what the grants are doing? Are those, because usually when you write a grant, it's a new project type thing. So I'm kind of wondering, where is that coming from? Is that new stuff, or why do we?
Let me repeat the two-part question. One question, the latter part of the question was, if our headcount is actually gone up by as much as 10%, what is driving that? And how, the first part was, how are we preparing for the potential of a recession?
Yeah, so on the first part of the question, I don't think it went up 10%. That might have been a little bit of a, I don't know, Tim, if you wanted to clarify.
Look at, and compared to the FY 23 budget, or 24, 25, it went up by 20 FTE, so it was just shy of 10%, but those were associated with grants.
That
so-
sounds like 1% if it's 20.
Well, 20 FTEs out of more than 2,000 employees, yeah. 20 employees out of 2,000. So it's not a lot. And then a lot of that has to do with grants that we received. For example, the federal government did give us money to say, hey, COVID was a big deal. We weren't ready for it. So do more work on communicable diseases. So we hire those people with that money. Unfortunately, they also said, when the new administration came in, we're taking that money away. 23 states attorney generals across the country went sued. Right now, there's a temporary restraining order, but it's under threat.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the recession question. How are we prepared besides our reserves, which are quite healthy? How
Yeah.
are we preparing for the potential of a recession?
Yeah, I think we're always looking at that question. I think it's likely, to be honest. I mean, I'm not in DC. I don't know what's going on in everybody's heads, but when I look at it, I think it's a very real possibility. And I think to me, as the leader of the organization on the administrative side, it means that we need to put in processes in place to have a plan B if that were to occur. And I think that means cuts. I think that means trying to make the cuts that make the most sense and have analysis and data behind those cuts so that we can offer that up to the council to say, we need to in order to balance our budget, we need to cut, I'm going to make up a number, $4 million. Here's what we think would visit the least pain and why, and then ultimately answer their questions, listen to community, and try to make the best collective decision in hard times.
And again, my focus is, let's be strategic, because whether the recession happens this year, next year, or 3 years, it's coming.
My question, education for us, it would be very helpful if you would be willing to publish a list of all of the titles for every employee in the city, all 2,400. Give us how much they made over the last 12 months base pay and how much they got in overtime over that same period of time.
We don't publish that, but we report that to the state, which publishes it. It is on the web. The state publishes that. We can give you that URL. It does. It includes base pay, overtime, and benefits. But if you don't know about it, that doesn't help you. So again, when there was a scandal in Bell, all cities were required to report that, and we do, and the state publishes it. I don't know the answer to that. But that's a good question. Other questions, and while we're asking questions, I'll see if we can call up the place where you can find all the city's financial information. In the back, Sam.
Hi, thank you for the so the city has 66 megawatts. Section code is
I'll let you take over while I try and find this thing.
given the different markets in this market, is the city able to issue a bond, for instance, for passing the water and power, for capital improvement? Or how would you expect something like this to be covered?
We often do issue bonds. The question was a little complicated. I didn't catch all of it, but it went to the cost of infrastructure for the utility.
Yeah, so the question is, are we able to issue a bond for capital improvement or passing the water and power for the consultants?
Yes, we absolutely are, and we do. So we do issue bonds to pay for capital investment. Yeah.
So
So there are two kinds of bonds.
Let them know that.
There are revenue bonds
That's
and there are general obligation bonds. So for the utility, we can issue bonds based upon the revenue that's going to come in to the electric and water utility. And so that's a revenue bond. A general obligation bond under the state constitution, I think, yeah. Under the state constitution, require a vote of the people. So the Rose Bowl issued revenue bonds. The center operating company to expand the convention center, issued revenue bonds. Water and Power have both issued over time revenue bonds. The only general obligation bond that I think we currently have is now the library. I think we paid off everything else.
The only general obligation bond on your property tax bill is the library, as you said.
General obligation bonds do get passed on to the citizens in your property tax. It's on top of your Proposition 13 1% base. And so there's a bond out for the school district. In fact, there are two. There's one for the community college district. And then there's one now for the library for the city. John?
Remember a few years ago, we paid $10 or $12 million of the interest due on Rose Bowl bonds for them.
Mhm.
We carry that as a receivable on our accounts.
The question is,
Next, 5 years, we may again unable to meet their interest payments.
so the question is, during COVID, the city had to pay the Rose Bowl's $12 million annual debt service payment twice. And is that something they owe the city or so is it carried as a receivable? And then what would happen if they run into the red in the future? Would we have to bail them out?
So the Rose Bowl is a city asset. The city owns it. The RBOC is its management company. It's a 501(c)(3). That's a special purpose one that works to manage it in the best way possible in a market that moves faster than the city can operate. And their assets are all pledged to the city. So their debt belongs to the city, which is why the city had to step in. I wasn't here for that, so I don't know all the particulars of how all that has happened. Since I've been here, they've paid their own debt, which is important. But, I think it's important for us to remember as well. Let me hold on. I think it's important for us as well to realize the importance of having that municipal stadium. When the fires hit, we were in trouble. We needed a lot of space. They tried to set up a brief a command center somewhere, I forget where, and it quickly outgrew itself. We called Jens Whedon from RBOC, said, can we use the Rose Bowl? He said, it's yours. We had about 4,000 firefighters there for days on end. And that was really important. So, are there burdens associated with it? Yes. Is it managed in a way now that we don't, they pay their own debt? Yes, and that's a good thing.
Okay, yes. Yes.
Each department sort of running like general executive accounting principles on its own, and like the budget and the or some of the figures move to everybody into the budget and digested somehow.
So the question is each department, I think, if I understand it, is each department responsible for the spending inside their department under generally accepted accounting principles? Or can they move that money around? Yes. Yes. I can answer that question with an unqualified yes. Because that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years and I pay very close attention to the accounting. All of tonight, we've been talking about budgeting. Budgeting is based upon a plan. You plan how much money you think you're going to get. You plan on how much money you think you're going to spend. Accounting is what you actually spent to the penny. And I'm just as concerned. In fact, I had a little disagreement with my colleagues on the city council. Normally, the city's very thick accounting report goes to the finance committee for serious questions like you've raised. Because of the fires, we skipped that this year, and it came to the city council, and they were going to approve it on what's called the consent calendar, which is we don't even bother to talk about it. And I said, can we hold it until we have a finance committee so we can have some serious questions? And my colleague said, well, why would we hold it? the report of the independent accountants said that everything's fine, that we followed all the rules. We have what's called a clean opinion. And I said, yes, that's true. It says that we didn't break any rules, but there's some really important information there. For example, that our utility made $75 million last year. I think that deserves some public discussion, especially when we're talking about raising rates. There are other interesting numbers in there that I thought bore discussion and answers on. I was outvoted, but to be fair, the mayor said, but we'll send it back to the finance committee for your questions after we approve it. So we did get a chance to ask those questions at the finance committee. And so we do follow generally accepted accounting principles in Pasadena, and I'm proud of that.
And
Two
Councilman
more-
Cole, if I could just make one, I'm a lawyer by training, so I always think about it in these legal terms. There's one legal entity, it's the city. And then the departments are, under the charter and the ordinance code, but they're just meant for administrative convenience. But there's one legal entity, the city, and there's one accounting for it and the consolidated accounting that we do. And it all follows what's called GAAP that you said, the generally accepted accounting principles. So we follow GAAP, we're audited, and that's what I think some people call it ACAFR, but the year-end reports that provide, you'll see all the departments there and the component units of the city.
So two more questions and then we'll wind up because you've been extraordinarily patient tonight.
So, and this is very small, part of the budget here, but I don't know how many fire engines you need, but that 1.4, whatever $1 million for fire engine, I can't imagine it's not gonna skyrocket. Given all the tariffs and everything, is there a secondary market for fire engines?
So the question is, given the sticker shock for a $1.5 million fire engine, can we buy used fire trucks or?
And to make matters worse, there's something like a 42-month lead time to get a new fire engine. It's really difficult with what's happened in that marketplace. I think we have gotten, say, Long Beach was ordered a particular fire truck, but they're trying to all use the same type of fire truck so their mechanics can do the same thing. Then they said, you know what, we don't need this one. We said, we'll take it. So we can get up in line and so we're doing that kind of stuff on the ambulance side because we also run ambulance services. We're trying to do it so that you can change the chassis of it one to the other. So yes, I don't know that there are used fire trucks. I don't know that market, but I know we're doing everything we can to reduce the cost. And I have heard of the idea of having an ambulance chassis that can be reused when you put, or no, I'm sorry, the top part of the ambulance, you can reuse it when you put a new chassis on it.
Felix?
There was a question about that all these budget numbers are available, but are these accounting numbers available?
Yes.
Did I look up
Yeah.
these?
So how do we share screen with the folks on Zoom and here? So that we could go on the web and go to the city's finance site.
Find it. Yeah, Tim is expert at this. If Tommy, we have two experts here. Tommy will put it up on the screen and then Tim will put it up online.
That'll be our conclusion, is give you the way to search out all these numbers. I couldn't be prouder of all of you coming out and asking
Is
these
it going to be on this
questions.
screen?
Again, I don't think we'll be able to
Sure.
afford business as usual in Pasadena going forward. That doesn't mean radical change, because the city is well managed. To have
It'd be good to show them how you found that.
20% reserves is really quite remarkable. To give you a sense, again, the city where I work, we're down to about 3% in our reserves. So Pasadena has got a lot of money in the bank, and that's because of good management over many years. But what has worked in the past is not a guarantee that it will work in the future. And the mayor and I, Mayor Gordo, we have a little dialogue that seems to go on at virtually every meeting, where, since I'm new, I raise some concerns about things that I would like to see change. And he responds at some length, explained to me why things have been very well managed in the past, and over the last 20 years, we've done a lot of great things. And I have no argument with that. but we cannot rest on our laurels. We are living in very challenging times. The most challenging times since I was a teenager, and it seems to be getting more challenging by the day. And again, let me reiterate, my goal is for you to be a participant in this, not for us to just, the 8 of us, make all of the decisions, but to actually have you involved. I hope when we have the operating budget, we'll get more than 4 letters. I hope when we do the operating budget that you will weigh in with your thoughts, your concerns, and your priorities. And I hope that we can do that in all 7 of our council districts. And we can really, again, democracy is not just voting for the person you like and hoping that it all goes well. Democracy is being involved. We started this experiment back in 1776. We're coming up, what, on our 250th anniversary? In just next year is 250 years of this incredible experiment of self-government, right? For thousands of years, with very few exceptions, human beings were run by priests, kings, emperors, generals, chieftains, but not by the people. And we, the people, we have to earn it. It's a responsibility. We have our rights, but we also have our responsibilities. One of them is being informed, and one of them is to actually take control of how we spend our money by being informed and understanding and making good choices. And so thank you all for being here.
Councilor Cole, we have a quick demonstration if people want.
Oh, yeah, that's what I wanted to do. Yes. Okay, here we go.
Yes,
So if you log on to cityofpasadena.net,
then just go to the government dropdown and then go to city departments. And then go to the finance department for the operating budget, as Councilmember Cole mentioned. And then just go to the financial documents. It is a little buried, but then you'll find the operating budget section. And then depending on the fiscal year that you're interested in, we've just published the online budget book. We're no longer doing the physical copy. But if you just open up that link, there you'll have the landing page that has all the different sections of the operating budget. So depending on the
city website, city departments, finance department.
follow the
financial
link,
documents.
yeah, financial documents.
So Jeanette, good question. Good questions all around. And thank you for the folks who are on Zoom who joined. Thank you for all being here in person. And let's thank our civil servants. Tommy is the real most valuable player. He's been our tech guy.